Some Mundos. Hello, everybody. It's Mr. B. Excuse me. Today we're going to talk about fractions, okay? Today we won't have any written work or anything for this. We just want to go back and kind of touch on what fractions are, the idea of a numerator and a denominator, and what they mean, okay? Next time we get together for math, which will be on Friday, we're going to talk about adding, subtracting fractions, and make sure we have common denominators, right? All right, so what is a fraction? Here are my actions. A fraction talks about parts of a whole. The top number, the numerator, tells us how many pieces we are talking about. The bottom number, the denominator, tells us how many pieces it takes to make one whole thing. Okay? So we're going to talk about numerator and denominator today and what they mean, what they entail. So when we move on to other things like mixed numbers, we understand, what makes a whole piece of whatever we're talking about. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about fractions. We're talking about pieces of a whole thing and pieces that are equal. So equal pieces of a whole thing. It has to be divided into equal amounts, okay, for it to be a true fraction. If you got one big piece of something, a little piece of something, that's not really a fraction. All the pieces have to be the same size, okay? So fractions are pretty fair. So let's take a look at a very easy fraction here. We've got a circle, right? And we're going to talk about the blue part, the part that is, let's pause. Okay, whoopsie. So we're going to talk about this fraction right here, this circle, okay? Now, to find the bottom number, the denominator, that tells us how many of these pieces it takes to make a whole thing. So the circle altogether is a whole circle, right? We've got a piece here and a piece here. Woo, fancy. It takes two of those pieces to make the whole thing. Oh man, look how fancy that is, right? But if we look at how many pieces we've got colored in, we've only got one of those pieces colored in. Does that make sense to you? Now, to stretch your understanding a little bit, if I had this fraction right here, right? This fraction, the denominator, tells us that it takes two whole pieces to make one whole thing, right? It takes two pieces to make one thing. And this top number, the numerator, tells us that we have all two pieces, right? So when the top number and the bottom number are the same, that means you've got one whole thing. And we'll talk about that more on Friday, okay? We're gonna get this down. Let's move on here. So, if we've got this whole square here is our whole thing, right? We're talking about this, I guess it's like a rectangle, right? I don't know. Okay, and it's divided up into three equal parts, right? So how many of these pieces does it take to make the whole rectangle? It takes 1, 2, 3 pieces to make one whole thing. I'm going to put that down here. So it takes 3 pieces. My denominator is 3. Let's trace, okay? Now how many blue segments are there? Well, they're equal pieces, but 2 of them are white. 1 of them is blue. So that would be 1/3. That tells us of the 3 pieces it takes to make our whole thing, only 1 of them is blue, right? That's what fractions are. They're pieces of a whole. Let's move on to another one here. Now, let's see. Can we stretch it? Let's make it harder. Let's stretch ourselves. I'm stretching myself. Okay. Now, this circle is one whole thing, right? So if I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of if the whole thing's cut into 4 equal pieces, they're the same size, right? So this is an actual fraction. This is the number it takes to make the whole circle. It takes 4 of those pieces, 4 of those little segments, right? But how many of them are colored in blue? only 3 of those pieces are blue. So 3 of the 4 are blue. It takes 4 to make the whole thing. If I had this fraction here, 4/4, that would mean that the whole thing, we're talking about one whole thing, right? Let's see here. If I can, let's insert a blank page here. We'll go one step further. Let's say if I had this fraction here, 5/4. This is improper. This is an improper fraction, right? We're just stretching ourselves a little bit here. Now we know that the denominator shows us how many pieces it takes to make one whole thing, right? But the numerator tells us how many of those pieces we have. Now check this out. It takes 4 to make up the whole thing, right? But I've got 5 pieces, right? 4 of those 5, or 4 of the 4, make one piece, right? But I've got 5 of those, don't I? Huh? That tells me I've got more than one whole thing. And I want to kind of leave you right there. We're going to talk about adding and subtracting fractions on Friday. I'm going to do a language arts with you tomorrow. So the language arts will probably be fairly easy. We're talking about, in language arts, we're talking about comparing 2 different texts. Okay, but we'll get to that tomorrow. What I want you to understand today is fractions are pieces of a whole thing, right? And if I've got this fraction right here, the bottom number tells us how many it takes to make one whole thing. That's the denominator. The top, the numerator, is how many of those pieces we have. And that's what I want you guys to get today, okay? And I know this is review. There's not going to be anything to download today or try. There will be on Friday. If you can't print, that's okay. Just open up the PDF on your computer and just write down the problems on a piece of paper and do them, okay? We're going to talk about adding and subtraction on Friday. All right, everybody. Stay safe. Don't get those COVID cooties all over you. All right? And hopefully soon we'll be back in the building. All right. Take care. Be out.